Right here on 2 Samuel chapter 16, verse 1, where it says, when David was a little past the top of the mountain where there was Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, who met him with a couple of saddled donkeys, and on them 200 loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 summer fruits, and a skin of wine. And the king said to Ziba, what do you mean to do with these? Excuse me, and I think we did read some of this, Jackie. I think you're correct. You said we got down to 15. Was it 15?
Awesome.
Yeah. So we're going to continue on with it anyway. So it helps to do a refresher. I've slept since then as well, and I know you guys have. So Ziba said, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, and the bread and the summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine for those who are faint in the wilderness to drink. Then the king said, and where is your master's son? And Ziba said to the king, indeed, he is staying in Jerusalem, for he said, today is the house of Israel will restore the kingdom of my father to me. So the king said to Ziba, here all that belongs to Mephibosheth is yours. And Ziba said, I humbly bow before you that I may find favor in your sight, my lord, O king. Verse 5, Shemaiah curses David. It says, now when King David came to Bahurim, there was a man from the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shemaiah, the son of Gera, coming from there. He came out cursing continuously as he came, and he threw stones at David and all the servants of the king of King David. And all the people of the mighty men were on the right and hand on his left. Also Shemaiah said thus when he cursed, come out, you bloodthirsty man, you rogue. The Lord has brought upon you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned, and the Lord has delivered the kingdom into the hand of Absalom your son. So now you are caught in your own evil, because you are a bloodthirsty man. Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Please let me go over and take off his head. But the king said, what have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? So let him curse, because the Lord has said to him, curse David. Who then shall say, why have you done so? And David said to Abishai and all the servants, see how my son who came from my own body seeks my life? How much more now may this Benjamite? Let him alone and let him curse, for so the Lord has ordered him. It may be that the Lord will look on my affliction, and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing this day. And as David and his men went along the road, Shemaiah went alongside the hillside opposite him and cursed as he went, threw stones at him, and kicked up dust. Now the king and all the people who were with him became weary, so they refreshed themselves there. Excuse me. And this is where we stopped last week, I think. I agree with Jackie, so I remember that song. Verse 15, the advice of Ahithophel. So meanwhile, Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with him. And so it was when Hushai and Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom, that Hushai said to Absalom, long live the king, long live the king. So Absalom said to Hushai, is this your loyalty to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend? And Hushai said to Absalom, no, but whom the Lord and this people and all the men of Israel choose, his I will be, and with him I will remain. Furthermore, whom should I serve? Should I not serve in the presence of his son, as I have served in your father's presence? So will I be in your presence. Then Absalom said to Ahithophel, give advice as to what we should do. And Ahithophel said to Absalom, go in to your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house, and all Israel will hear that you are abhorred by your father. Then the hands of all who are with you will be strong. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the top of the house, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Now, this advice of Ahithophel, which he gave to those days, was as if one had inquired at the oracle of God. So was all the advice of Ahithophel, both with David and with Absalom. Okay? So, we know that David had talked to Ahithophel prior to him going to Absalom, right? So we know that David had told Ahithophel to do what for Absalom? Give him some foolish advice, right?
Yeah.
Right. So just to lay that on you from last week.
Makes perfect sense.
Last week. So 2 Samuel chapter 16, David flees from Absalom and asserts his reign, right? So we see that Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, it says this Ziba was the servant of Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, to whom David showed great kindness in 2 Samuel chapter 9. It says who met him with a couple of saddle donkeys, right? We know in the first part of this chapter we see that Ziba meets King David with these donkeys and stuff, right? At this time, said a great need, Ziba met David with essential supplies. This was a generous and helpful gift from Ziba. Don't you think so? He brought all those cakes, he brought the wine just in case, bread just in case they got tired and weary. And whenever they're doing all this walking and stuff like that, you're going to run out of supplies. I know that being in the service, I know Roger the same way. Being Recon, Roger and them, they carried a limited supply, and so they had to ration out their food. And so did we, in the Marine Corps. So I know how it feels to go 2, 3, 4, 5, sometimes 10, 12 hours with nothing to eat, even longer than that.
Rucksack only carries so much.
That's right. A rucksack will only carry so much, So same way here, and they didn't have the equipment we have, Roger, today to carry their stuff and and the type of food that we have that would, stay, compact and stay fresh for a while. So we see that in 3 and 4, Ziba speaks with Mephibosheth, right? It says, then the king said, where's your master's son? And Ziba said to the king, indeed, he is staying in Jerusalem. For he said, today the house of Israel will restore the king of my father to me. So the king said to Ziba, here all that belongs to Mephibosheth is yours. And Ziba said, I humbly bow before you that I may find favor in your sight, my lord, O king. He said that you're staying in Jerusalem. Ziba told David that Mephibosheth was in Jerusalem waiting to come to power after David and Absalom ruined each other. It said Ziba told David that Mephibosheth longed to restore the family of Saul to power, because we noticed in 3 and 4 when he said that to him. So, a lot of things going on behind David's back that he that he didn't really realize or know, right? So things are coming to fruition on, I think, right there in front of David, and David is seeing this. But David's not a dumb king, is he? He's been around a while, so he's seeing and hearing all this stuff, and I think has a plan. So it says these. Let's see. Today, where he says, today the house of Israel will restore the king kingdom of my father to me. It says, these are lies that Ziba told David, and this was to be revealed in 2 Samuel chapter 19, which we'll get there. It says, actually, Ziba left Mephibosheth behind to make it look as if Mephibosheth did not support David. I'm not going to read that part because it's going to give away what we're going to learn in the future chapters. So, but we see that Shemaiah curses David, right? It says Shemaiah curses a disposed king. It says in 5 through 8, we notice that it says now when King David came to Baram, there was a man from the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shemaiah. Shemaiah wasn't happy, was he? Do you think he knew what he was talking about, though? Yes? No? What was Shemaiah shouting to the king and to the king's men? He was directing it to the king, but what was he saying? Look there in your verses where it says, right there. Say again.
Bloodthirsty man.
Bloodthirsty man.
Killer of men.
Yep. So what did he mean by this?
He's a murderer.
Yeah, it says, I know right here, it says, Shemaiah was a distant relative of Saul from the tribe of Benjamin, who cursed David as a man of bloodshed, a man of Belial. He could possibly be the Cush. It says, Shemaiah declared the loss of David's throne was God's retribution on his past sins, and David accepted this curse from the Lord. It would be that Shemaiah was accusing David of the murders of Abner and Ahishbosheth and Uriah. Remember the three that were killed, that were very, very close to King David, and it was all because of David's sin with Bathsheba. Okay, so we know for a fact that Shemaiah was speaking truth, wasn't he? He had a right to be upset, and so he was, kind of, what do you say? The word that we use today when we see people on TV throwing rocks, and what are they doing? What's it called? Rioting, right? He was the first rioter, I think, throwing rocks and stones and stuff and shouting at the king. So
Now be careful.
yeah.
You know that those democratically led riots were not riots.
Yeah.
They were peaceful protests.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, they were down Hampton City.
They were just lighting up the night sky with their voice.
Yeah, I'm not going there. So
This cat should have looked
It says-
at his distant relative Saul to see on what all he had done in his reign.
absolutely. A lot of times when you start throwing stones, you forget about your own past, right? And I've done that in my past too. Get in an argument with someone and then trying to defend myself, I kind of stick my foot further and further in my mouth. And I've done that plenty of times. So, I agree. I agree with what you're saying, Roger. You look at the kind of king that Saul was, and the things that happened during his reign. It's there again.
How many times did he try to kill David?
David, absolutely, hunting him down for years.
Yeah,
So,
tracking him, hunting him.
yeah. So it says, a man from the family of the house of Saul. So Shemaiah was a distant relative of the former king Saul, and he still resented David for replacing the dynasty of Saul. Now, David had a part in this, but who else had a part in that? The man upstairs, right? God said this, right? It says, cursing continuously and throwing stones, you bloodthirsty man, you rogue. That's some pretty harsh words coming from somebody, isn't it? It says, Shemaiah was about an offensive it says Shemaiah was about as offensive as a person could be. He wanted to destroy and shed any shred of dignity or confidence that David had left. Do you know those type of people today? That it doesn't matter how far down you are in the ladder, they seem to just want to kick you and kick you and
Kick you
kick you.
further down.
Yeah, absolutely. And those people that don't want you to climb the ladder, it happens. But in this case, I believe what Roger was saying. He was from the lineage, of Saul, and he was taken up for his family's bloodline, and thought that he'd been done wrong, and yeah. So, what is it like? So anyway, it says there's always people ready to rejoice when a leader falls. Shemaiah had his heart against David for a long time, but he couldn't only show it when David was down and out. It says it is very hard to bear a cowardly attack. One is very apt to reply and use hard words to one who takes advantage of your position and deals you the coward's blow. Only the coward strikes a man when he is down. This was said by Spurgeon. But, excuse me, what do you see that David said to his men about Shemaiah? What did David do?
Men wanted to go chop him up in little pieces.
Yeah, they want to take his head, right?
But David said, no, that we're not going to harm him.
He said, let him do it. If God tells him to do it, let him do it.
Absolutely. It says Shemaiah was wrong because David actually treated Saul and his family with great love and graciousness. So Shemaiah was wrong because David was not a bloodthirsty man. It is true that he was a man of war, but not a bloodthirsty man. Shemaiah was wrong because David did not bring Saul and his family to ruin. Saul himself brought his family to ruin. Shemaiah was right that the Lord had brought this upon David, but not for any of the reasons Shemaiah thought, as you and I were talking about just a few minutes ago, Roger. So, he had some things right, but he failed to recognize that God is over all, and that, if it's God's will, it's going to happen, whether or not you want it to or not, We see that David receives adversity with humility in verses 9 through 14 when it says, Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? So Abishai is asking King David, why should why should we let him say this? Why are you letting him do this? And we see again, as Luis said, that King David knew that it was the Lord. The Lord had put him up to it. So he was like, let him curse. It says David didn't try to shut up Shemaiah. He didn't close his ears to unpleasant or critical words. David was willing to hear what God might say to him through a cursing critic or attack. Right? He was willing to hear out Shemaiah. He didn't say, I've had enough. Go chop his head off, chop him up in little pieces like Roger said. No, he said, okay, God, I'm open to suggestions, why is this happening? Let him speak. I want to hear it. That way I can know from God's point of view why this is happening, So David let Shemaiah speak because he was not a bloodthirsty man. And here's how you know he wasn't, because the line that shows right here in the Bible, whenever he says, what have I to do with you? So he asked, his servant. He says, ironically, if David were the kind of man Shemaiah said he was, Shemaiah would have been killed immediately. That's right. He would have been, absolutely, Luis. He'd have been done, because David would have been like, no, you're not saying that about me.
After that first round, he would have been done.
Yeah, because
he would have had a chance to throw anymore.
he wouldn't have had another chance.
David just went.
Absolutely. And you notice he didn't have a slingshot like David. He was just throwing rocks. So, but if you look at it, people throw rocks all the time, don't they? You can be in your car driving down the road and somebody cuts you off and you're doing the right thing, but they're going to throw a rock first. You know, what are you doing? Because you're in their way, you know. And then all of a sudden you see the birds flying and the birds chirping. So I know Mama used to say all the time, what's that old saying? 6 and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. You know. Says.
Now they're teaching the kids that those words will hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right, Jackie. You're right. They are.
David must have started that saying right there.
Yeah, absolutely. It says he did let him speak, right? It says David let Shemaiah speak and everything because he put. It says David let Shemaiah speak because he put the Shemaiah problem into perspective. It says he tells him, he says, "See how my son who came from my own body seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjamite." So David knew that his real problem was Absalom, not Shemaiah. And he did not lose perspective on that just because somebody was throwing rocks at him. You know, he knew his biggest problem was not this relative of Saul, but his own son. You know, he put things into perspective. And a lot of times it's like, and we don't do that until after we calm down. We kind of put everything into perspective, you know, when somebody, for instance, just what I mentioned a few minutes ago, if somebody cuts you off and you're doing everything right and they're throwing stones and it makes you to where you go on the defensive and you want to throw stones, right? Well, you calm down and then you see, you know, hey, that wasn't the Christian thing to do. I should have done this. You know, but David didn't lose sight of that, of what God wanted him to do. He kept everything into perspective, you know, and that's one of the hardest things to learn is to stay calm, stay collective, and keep that Christian attitude and that love for that person, even though you know that you were in the right. Keep everything into perspective. We see that David told him, he said, let him alone and let him curse. David could take this fellow's head off, and that would have been in a moment, just like Luis said. But instead, he says, and this makes a splendid example: if you can revenge yourself, don't. If you could do it as easily as opening your hand, keep it shut. If one bitter word could end the argument, ask for grace to spare the bitter word. And that is from Spurgeon as well. It says, so they refused themselves there. They refreshed themselves there when they were going on. They got weary, and then they decided to stop and refresh themselves. It says, in this, it says, David was not without hope or comfort. God allowed comfort to find him, even if it was the small things. David was able to receive comfort because he was at peace and he knew that God was in control of Israel. In refusing to cling to his throne, David was like Jesus, who, being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant and coming into the likeness of man, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. And that's Philippians chapter 2, verse 6 through 8. It says, as we thus follow David through these days of humiliation and shame, we nevertheless understand more perfectly that he was indeed a man after God's own heart. And you notice, even though David was going through these issues with his kingdom and then with his son and stuff like that, God still offered comfort with these little things. It's the little things like Ziba bringing the donkey that had all this refreshments on it that would later, as they were traveling and got tired and weary and everything, would bring comfort. And God knew that would bring comfort to David and his men. And so God allowed them to rest and take refreshments so that they could build themselves back up. And this gave them hope, you know what I'm saying? So that they could give thanks to the Lord, that they were able to, leave and live to fight another day. So in 15 through 19, we see that Absalom receives Hushai as an advisor. And I'm going to close pretty soon here. We see that 20 through 23, Absalom follows Ahithophel's advice. And where it says, then Absalom said to Ahithophel, give advice as what you would do. And Ahithophel said to Absalom, go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house, and all Israel with her will hear that you are abhorred by your father. Then the hands of all who are with you will be strong. So they pitched a tent for Absalom to take at the top of the house, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. We see Ahithophel told Absalom to do something so offensive that it would eliminate any possibility of reconciliation with David. Ahithophel felt this strong statement would give courage to Absalom's followers, and it did, didn't it? It says, in the ancient world, taking the king's concubines was not only an act of immorality, but also an act of treason. This was a way for Absalom to not only replace David, but also to complete repudiate his father, which means make his father look less of a king. So it says, why did Ahithophel give such radical advice? Because it made sense from his own self-interest. Ahithophel had the most to lose if Absalom failed to keep the throne, or if David and Absalom reconciled. He would be revealed and rejected as a traitor. It says, the Puritan commentator John Trapp wrote this of Ahithophel's tongue, which gave this wicked advice. A tongue worthy to have been cut off, shred in goblets, and driven down the throat of him that thus misused him, to the engaging of Absalom in such an unpardonable villainy, besides hazard of his immoral soul. In other words, the things that were done to him, he was trying to use that as a twofold, double-edged sword. So, but we see that Absalom pitched a tent, and he went into his father's concubines and did that. And we know that now the advice of Ahithophel, which he gave in those days, was as if one had injured at the oracle of God. Ahithophel had a well-deserved reputation for giving counsel almost as good as God, but in this case, his counsel was foolish and destructive. So,
Actually, it was very good.
yeah, it was.
I mean, if Absalom would have followed Ahithophel's advice, David would have been in a world of hurt.
Yes, absolutely. It says it was foolish and destructive because it was motivated by bitterness. Bitterness was the power to turn, has the power to turn our best qualities sour. It was foolish and destructive because God answered David's prayer in 2 Samuel 15:31. It says, by promoting Ahithophel to give his foolish counsel, and in promoting Absalom to take the foolish counsel, it says, strangely, Absalom thought he could establish his kingdom through immorality. He was a clever and skilled politician, but an ignorant about the ways of God. So, with that being said, we're going to close. Any questions on chapter 16? Very good chapter. Very good chapter. We see that we're getting down to the meat and potatoes here. So, anything anybody want to bring up? Any questions? No? All right. Brother Frank, will you close us in a word of prayer, sir?
Dear Heavenly Father, we do thank you once again, Lord, for this day and many blessings.
Yes.
Thank you for this lesson that's been brought today, Lord. We ask that you would put your hand on the spoken and the unspoken prayer requests, Lord. Just
Yes.
be with us as we go into the main service, the song service, and the preaching afterwards, Lord. Keep us safe and do bring us the rain that's needed, Lord, without the storms. And just keep us safe as we go our separate ways and bring us back to born and in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Bring in truth. We need